Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you didn't know, I'm a diagnosed narcissist, but before I say the things I'm going to say in this video, keep in mind that I am not a licensed professional. So with that out of the way, I wanted to film this video basically talking about my emotions because it's quite a fucking I don't know what you want to say, like complexity, a distress, blah blah blah. I mean, the thing that I'm basically talking about is how does a person with poor emotional regulation skills talk about their own emotions? So I'm not gonna lie, this video is low-key uncomfortable to make. I mean, if you ask me what isn't uncomfortable to make or do or just exist, existence is very much incredibly uncomfortable if you ask me. So when it comes to my emotions, a lot of it is just, dissatisfaction, a lot of insecurity, a lot of bitterness, a lot of hatred, a lot of cynicism, a lot of just, yeah, constant, I don't know, irritation that I choose to go out of my way to ignore all the time, actually. Because I made a video a while back, actually, talking about mirroring, and I kind of clarify that I think it's like sort of like super dumb when people want to paint this image that like, oh, narcissists are always going out of their way to, like, I don't know, mirror you so they can quote unquote like take advantage of you. And I'm just like, well, yeah, but not necessarily. I mean, I do believe it gets more like complex and more like nuanced than that. Of course, everybody has to talk about that in the case of their narcissistic abuse and whatnot, because that's pretty much all the content that you can find on NPD online for like the most part. But my videos are talking about like my own like actual experiences that I believe, are separated from exaggeration and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. So basically, I see a contradiction in my emotions, or I guess just like emotions in general, because facts don't care about like your feelings, right? And I have always considered myself more of like a logical person. I mean, MBTI wise, I'm a fucking like INTP, but it's not really about that. The main hypocrisy that I already see towards like my own emotions, so like I'm not gonna be like super fucking edgy and say that like my emotions, quote unquote, like do not exist. I mean, I feel a lot of emptiness, and I think it is exaggerated, like sort of like stereotype when a lot of people say that like cluster Bs just don't really feel anything in general. Like, let's say people with ASPD, let's say narcissists, let's say well, actually, not necessarily borderlines, because I think like the highest form of societal acceptance towards people with disorders that talk about like poor emotional regulation skills have always come to people with like BPD, because oh, they freak out, blah blah blah, this or that. And narcissists such as myself tend to be like more, I guess, composed, because we don't necessarily want to show that like weakness and that like panic and stuff. But I mean, like, I still relate to borderlines, and I feel a lot of like splitting all the time, which is like black and white thinking, whether things are either like all good or all bad. Just because like I'm not showing it, it doesn't mean that I don't have those emotions. Like, I do feel a lot of like nothingness all the time, and I speak about it in a lot of my videos that, oh, there's just like this chronic emptiness, there's just this like like loss of like personal identity, because like I don't really know who I am. But I'm just gonna like clear it up, like I do feel emotions, they're just quite fleeting. And to be honest, I don't know if this is like purposeful or not when it comes to a lot of times where like I don't feel emotions. I do think it is genuine that I feel a lot of like chronic emptiness and all that kind of stuff, so I don't really like know who I am, quote unquote. But I think a lot of times when you encounter cluster Bs, and I don't know, maybe a lot of people might even describe us as like quote unquote like dissociative and like whatnot, but at least like there's something that I want to say about that in terms of like being a narcissist. Would you actually want to feel your emotions for the most part if the constant emotions you have are just constantly reminding you of like the bitterness and awful displays of behaviors and actions of like human beings all the time, the constant like looking at in terms of like the hierarchies in society, who's on top, who's at the bottom, who has control, what control do you not have in your life, blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. Like, you know, I do think those are, fair critiques. I have a lot of like misanthropic, like critiques about like society and like the world in general. I see us as quote unquote like very flawed. And one of my more like recent videos on here was literally talking about like antinatalism. So I do feel a lot of emotions, but I don't know if it's like for my own survival or my for own like whatever. Like I get tired of my own emotions, admittedly. Like that probably I should say it doesn't mean that like they're not there, quote unquote. But then a lot of times when you realize that like a lot of this is like so stupid and pointless, I don't know, not even necessarily like my emotions, let's just say like life in general. Like when you see like the exaggeration of like life itself, when the finish line of it is basically just like death and everything before that is just like gone. Or okay, like you live every single day of your life and you're not going to get like yesterday back and you're not going to get like today back. I do admit that it is difficult to form attachments to, I guess, just like anything. I've always struggled in terms of like, okay, what do I really care about? What do I have like, like strong like passions in, quote unquote? And I try to get in that state where it's like, okay, what gets me up every single morning? Like what is the thing that makes me happy to wake up every single day? Like maybe a lot of people can just like get up every single day because like, oh, they're excited to do something. They're excited to just like seize the day. But like truth be told, I genuinely just, do not get it. Because every single time I try to ask that question, or every single time I try to ask like, okay, why does anything happen? It's like gaslighting from like the survival instinct, basically, like the cognitive dissonance it requires to, yes, get out of bed, take care of yourself, take care of your body, brush your teeth, eat, whatever, all this, like rinse and repeat, and it doesn't really matter. And philosophically, I struggle to be an absurdist. I mean, Camus does say that one must imagine like Sisyphus happy, but I'm just like, okay, I honestly, I don't know how to do that. So I do feel a lot of like frustration and bitterness. So I obviously like do have like emotions, but how are you supposed to work it out if like the emotions that you feel about things are basically as a result of like maybe other emotions that are simply, like unattainable to you? Because I think like I've expressed a lot on the channel. I don't know what genuine happiness actually feels like. I don't know what genuinely being content is, because if I don't feel my emotions that are just like frustrating and bitter and put me in a bad mood, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's me. I think the world genuinely is just, like a quote unquote like piece of shit and all that, and this existence is just like, super awful and terrible. I think of myself as just being like, super honest about it. I like ignorance is bliss, right? So maybe I'm just like too smart to be happy. I mean, that's one of the ways that like I always prop myself up. I am this miserable just because I am just, like that smart or whatever. But I mean, again, it's just like, go big or go home, right? Even when I'm happy, it's all fleeting. And it is kind of disappointing, and it is like super sad. And I think like if you have like a narcissistic sort of like personality disorder, it almost just feels like your negative emotions are like truly the only ones that are like genuine, because happiness to me will always equal distraction. Because if it's not, like pure nothingness, then what a joke this existence is. What an exaggeration that like this, existence is. And every life experience just feels like that annoying person that is constantly showing off. I mean, I do believe that everybody on earth is like selfish and truly just like out for themselves, truly just out for like the tribe that like they care about. But then they mask it as if like there's this whole like getting together. But I mean, like that's dumb and that's stupid, because you've heard me say a lot of times where it's like, okay, most people with common interests will, get together in one specific sort of like group, whatever you want to call it, country, town, city, whatever. And, it always has a reputation. Like if I just use the United States as an example, okay, like to take a state, what is it? Is it a red state, or is it, like a blue state and like stuff like that? And when you constantly exist, just like, like like observing this and it never stops, like truly, like maybe that in a sense like is its own skill to truly be like that ignorant. Because to like feel any sorts of like emotions, why would it truly not just be like constant sorts of like disappointment? So, or like, a constant sense of like dread or something like that. So every single time I do exist and like I do live life, like I can't feel happy, but I guess sometimes the emptiness is more soothing compared to like the reality of like actual pain. Because you know a lot of times I just want like peace and quiet, if that's actually possible. Like I just want to get away from the notion of like this life making us participate in these like arbitrary like made up like performances to just like hold the scripts of like our ego in place. And yeah, sometimes the quietness really is just like the peace. It doesn't help me like learn anything about myself, obviously, and it does still constantly put me in this like perpetual state of like an identity crisis in a sense. But like at the same time, the world doesn't even feel like it's truly like accepting at all. Well, yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, like, not even just necessarily from like the notion in which I talk about like, oh, people will be separated based on political beliefs, people will be separated based on philosophical beliefs or religious beliefs, or whatever it is that like these like categories that like link certain people together, while we try our best to pretend that we're okay with other people having like differing beliefs, when the truth is actually no. Humans are so fragile in their ego that I feel like even in exchange of like ideas will always be some sort of like power play, will always be some sort of like dominance of like a thing. Because like it's not like you're going to change your mind. People can never change their minds from the things that like make them uncomfortable, the script that they tell themselves every single day in order to like feel better about like existence. So like yeah, that's why people do not like nihilism. That's why people do not like skeptic sort of like philosophy, because they can't deal with the existential crisis that might come if they were to tarnish the deeply held scripts that they have, that are purely just made out of like cope and desperation. But like that aside, I think what sucks about like being like a narcissist is that like people are put off, or like, okay, I shouldn't even necessarily just say narcissist. I feel like maybe just like a cluster B sort of like person. But a lot of times I feel like if I'm trying my best to like be nice, I don't like showing my emotions to other people, because I know that they're not even necessarily gonna like accept me, quote unquote. Not even just for like other stuff, but it's like in the lens of like having like narcissistic personality disorder. And I think like this is why socializing to me can often be like so draining, because I have to pretend to be like some kind of person that I'm not. Like I force myself to smile, I force myself to agree that, oh, it's a good day, but I'm still thinking like in my mind, I'm just like, okay, yeah, even if I say it's a good day, what about the day that somebody else is having? And when yeah, like basically it's similar to like an antinatalist sort of like thought pattern, perhaps, because like in reference to like that video that like one of my recent videos that I made about like antinatalism, like it doesn't matter, everything is contributing to like the perpetuation of like suffering. Like if I have it good in any sort of like capacity, that was basically on the basis that like somebody had to have had it worse, because I'm somewhat okay. And it still like bums me out, because it's a constant cycle of like, oh yeah, this or that. But anyway, a constant cycle of like, okay, I'm fine, so you're not fine, so I don't know, I'm fine, so you're not fine. You're fine, so I'm not. And it's just like a rotation in this world of like meaningless ups and downs that eventually just like plummet to the end of like nothing. But okay, this is what I'm talking about, like, when I talk about like, okay, not necessarily being like accepted as a narcissist for like my emotions and whatnot. And it's like yeah, it screws me over like either way, because people want to see a person, quote unquote, filled with like substance, filled with like quote unquote like depth or like whatever, but they don't get that if I'm just like, like in my blank state because like yeah, I'll admit a lot of times like being in this blank state or being in this like, like notion of like not feeling anything is, you know, better than the pain, but then I'll still like like potentially get judged for it because it's like, oh, what is there more to you, bro? And you know, so either like okay, I have to lie and pretend to be maybe as like delusionally happy as like all these other people on earth, or if I do show the truth in which like who I am and I'm just like, well, I woke up today with like a sense of dread just like yesterday, just like the day before that, and I think this dread is going to continue on tomorrow and then the day after that and then the day after that, and people are just like, oh man, you're such a downer. You're just killing my vibe. Like like yeah, this is what people don't like about like narcissists, right? Like, oh, like you're such a buzzkill. You suck the energy out of the room. The like blah blah blah. And then I'm just like, then why did you want to hear my emotions in the first place? Or it's like just like just leave me alone, straight up. But then people have this thing where it's like if you are more introverted, let's say they'll be like, oh, he must be you know like hiding something or whatever because like like obviously like there's like an extrovert like bias that like introverts are like up to something evil, right? Because like, oh, why isn't he talking to anybody, why isn't he like doing like this blah blah blah, but then it's conditional still on the basis that if they do try to talk to you, if they do try to like um get you to like express yourself more and basically perform that the same way that like they do, basically it's like, oh wait, not like that. You still have to do it in like the manufactured script that I demand of you, because if you don't, I'm still not gonna like you in the same way that I was passing judgment before I even got to know you in the first place. So like it's just exhausting, bro. Like existing in like human life as like a narcissist in this like fashion, because like when I just want to get away from it, from just like all the dread, all the like like terrible feelings that like I don't like, you know, I'm still made out to like oh, there's something wrong with you. But then okay, if I'm being honest, because you asked for it, it's like yeah, no, I don't really like that either. Cause like yeah, like oh my gosh, you're like ruining my energy. So I'm just like straight up like okay, like then you just don't like me. Like you just like don't like me either way. So when I think about it, when I think of like interactions, and when I think about like how other people make me feel, how I make other people feel, like yeah, it's like I don't know what to call it, like toxic cycle or like whatever, but it's like it just makes me not care about how I'm perceived. It just makes me not care in a way how I make other people feel, because yeah, I step back and I'm just like, these emotions are like like super awful, because like existing is just super awful. Like yeah, to feel is just filled with like pain, and how are you supposed to like reconcile that? Because happy emotions, if you ask me, are super fleeting. And it's like yeah, I'm sure I've felt happiness in like some capacity, probably, I don't know, because I'm just like, if I circle it back to like okay, like yeah, cluster b cluster B people, you know, do not have zero emotions, despite like a stereotype that might be, quote unquote like thrown out there. But it's like if like speaking for myself, I don't like, I can't necessarily speak in like anybody else's position, but it's like how do you make it make sense to somebody that it's like yeah, I acknowledge my emotions, like how terrible I feel or like this or that, but like truth be told, I'm not that attached to my own emotions, like regardless, because like yeah, I can play around with it, whatever, blah blah blah, and I'm sure like my feelings inevitably like do spill out, and you see the negativity, you see the pessimism, you see the misanthropy, the cynicism, like whatever it's called. But then like like I'm over it, like truly, like after it's like done being said, after like yeah, I just go back to just like like not feeling like anything. So like yeah, okay, like there people say like your emotions are supposed to be like deep to you, but I'm just like, then again at the same time I'm just like, oh yeah, big deal, I'm hurting, other people are hurting, yeah, big deal, we're just gonna die, so what?